The Shining Iceberg explained. The Stephen King dislike refers to the famous and well-documented animosity that the original author of the novel holds towards Stanley Kubrick's film adaptation. The author famously felt that the movie was a beautiful Cadillac, but lacked an engine, heavily criticizing the cold portrayal of Jack Torrance's descent into madness and the depiction of Wendy Torrance as a submissive character. This public disapproval eventually led the author to produce and write his own television miniseries adaptation in the late 1990s to more faithfully capture his original vision of the story. The final shot of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining zooms into a photograph from July 4, 1921, featuring Jack Torrance smiling at an Overlook Hotel ball, an eerie ending that has generated several major narrative theories alongside a recently solved real-world mystery. In universe, the most prominent explanation is the reincarnation theory, supported by Kubrick himself, which posits that Jack is the literal rebirth of a past hotel employee, mirroring the ghost of Delbert Grady's claim that Jack has always been the caretaker. Alternatively, the soul absorption theory suggests the Overlook acts as a supernatural sponge that traps and digests the spirits of its victims, meaning Jack is absorbed into the hotel's eternal, ghostly gallery upon his death. Others interpret the photo as a metaphor for cyclical trauma, representing an endless loop of domestic abuse and historical American violence, with Jack's pose even drawing symbolic comparisons to occult imagery or historical figures like George Washington. Beyond these narrative interpretations, researchers recently solved the real-world origin of the photograph, discovering that Kubrick did not stage the shot, but instead airbrushed Jack Nicholson's face over a real 1921 archival image of British ballroom dancer Santos Cassani at a Valentine's Day ball in London, choosing the authentic piece because its genuine historical faces perfectly captured the eerie essence of the era. The Room 217 versus 237 entry details a deliberate change made from the source novel to the movie regarding the hotel's most infamous haunted room. In the original novel, the supernatural horrors occur inside Room 217. However, the management of the Timberline Lodge in Oregon, which was used for the exterior shots of the Overlook Hotel, requested that Stanley Kubrick change the room number to a non-existent room so that future guests would not be discouraged from booking it. Because the lodge did not possess a room 237, this new number was chosen for the film, inadvertently sparking decades of complex conspiracy theories linking the film to the moon landing. The Here's Johnny retakes entry addresses the agonizingly meticulous filmmaking style of Stanley Kubrick during one of the most iconic scenes in horror cinema. The line itself was completely ad-libbed by Jack Nicholson as a spontaneous reference to Johnny Carson's famous late-night television introduction, which initially confused the director who had been living in England. Because Stanley Kubrick demanded absolute perfection and continuous strain from his actors, the sequence was filmed over a period of 3 days, requiring Jack Nicholson to chop through approximately 60 real wooden doors before the definitive footage was captured. The Native American genocide entry explores a widely analyzed subtext regarding the systemic destruction of indigenous peoples embedded within the Overlook Hotel. This reading points to the hotel's prominent Navajo and Hopi decor motifs, the manager's explicit mention that the resort was built on an ancient Indian burial ground, and the repeated visual motifs of red blood erupting from the elevators. Analysts suggest that Stanley Kubrick utilized these background elements as a chilling historical commentary on America's dark past and forgotten violence. The impossible architecture entry details the surreal and physically contradictory layout of the Overlook Hotel's interior spaces. Production designers intentionally crafted rooms with windows that look outside but logically face the interior of the building, and doors that lead to nowhere or block existing hallways. These spatial anomalies were meticulously engineered by Stanley Kubrick to subtly disorient the audience on a subconscious level, mirroring the character's rapid descent into psychological madness. The deleted epilogue entry refers to a missing 2-minute sequence that originally played in theaters immediately following Jack Torrance's freezing death in the maze. The scene took place in a hospital, where manager Stuart Ullman visits Wendy and Danny to tell them that investigators found absolutely no evidence of supernatural activity at the hotel. Unsettled by the audience's mixed reactions and deciding the scene was unnecessary, Stanley Kubrick personally ordered projectionists to cut the physical film strip out of every theatrical reel across the country, just 1 week after the film's official release. The Apollo 11 moon landing cover-up entry explores one of the most famous conspiracy theories in film history, popularized heavily by the documentary Room 237. Adherents of this theory believe that Stanley Kubrick secretly directed the simulated television footage for the 1969 moon landing under instructions from the United States government. According to this narrative, the director used the Overlook Hotel setting as a giant, guilt-ridden confession filled with hidden clues to signal his involvement to the public. Proponents point to specific visual indicators throughout the film to build their case, most notably Danny Torrance wearing a knitted sweater featuring an Apollo 11 rocket ship as he walks directly into Room 237. Conspiracy theorists suggest that this room number was chosen specifically because the average distance from the Earth to the Moon was believed to be roughly 237,000 miles at the time. Additionally, the unique hexagonal pattern of the hotel's carpet is said to intentionally mimic the geometric design of the Apollo launch pad, transforming the entire movie into a coded cryptographic message. The mirror connection entry highlights an abstract interpretive framework that challenges whether the hotel's ghosts possess any actual supernatural reality within the narrative. This analytical theory posits that every single paranormal encounter or ghostly conversation experienced by Jack Torrance is an entirely internal manifestation of his deteriorating mental state. Analysts notice that whenever Jack interacts with a spirit, such as talking to the phantom bartender Lloyd or conversing with the ghost of Delbert Grady, there is a physical mirror positioned directly in front of him. This recurring framing choice suggests that Jack is merely speaking to his own fractured reflection and giving into his deeply repressed violent impulses, rather than interacting with actual discarnate entities. The theory breaks down the hotel as a psychological echoing chamber, where the glass surfaces serve as thresholds for Jack's internal madness. By maintaining this strict visual rule throughout the production, Stanley Kubrick left an intentional artistic ambiguity that allows the film to function seamlessly as both a traditional haunted house story and an intense psychological study of isolation-induced schizophrenia. The CIA MKUltra connection entry proposes a dense political subtext tying the narrative themes of the film to real-world government mind control experiments. This theory alleges that the film is a macro-level allegory for Project MKUltra, a secret United States Central Intelligence Agency research program that utilized sensory deprivation, psychological torture, and chemical substances to develop mind control procedures. Within this framework, the isolated and winterlocked Overlook Hotel acts as a specialized laboratory environment designed to systematically break down a subject's psyche. Jack Torrance represents the vulnerable test subject, who is subjected to extreme isolation, environmental triggers, and psychological stressors until his core personality completely fractures. His subsequent behavioral programming prompts him to turn violently against his own family, mimicking the dark objectives of real-world handler control operations. Viewers who support this connection argue that Stanley Kubrick was deeply aware of contemporary military-industrial scandals and used the horrific transformations inside the resort to expose the devastating human cost of psychological manipulation. The Baphomet Pose entry focuses on the distinct body language and physical staging utilized by Jack Nicholson during several critical moments of madness. Sharp-eyed viewers notice that Jack's body language closely mirrors the traditional occult illustrations of Baphomet, a deity symbolizing dualism and esoteric balance. Most notably, during the iconic 1921 ballroom photograph at the end of the film, Jack is posed with one arm raised and one arm lowered, directly mimicking the "as above, so below" hand gestures associated with the sabbatic goat imagery. This intentional framing suggests a darker, ritualistic undercurrent to Jack's transformation, hinting that he has become a permanent avatar for the hotel's ancient evil. By embedding these specific occult postures into the cinematography, Stanley Kubrick added a layer of cosmic horror to Jack's descent, transforming him from a simple madman into a consecrated figure within the hotel's eternal cycle of violence. The "every copy is personalized" entry derives from a popular internet creepypasta and gaming meme that accidentally cross-contaminated online film discussions. The phrase originally started as a surreal horror rumor regarding the video game Super Mario 64, claiming that an advanced artificial intelligence built into the software altered the game based on the player's subconscious fears. When applied to The Shining, the entry functions as a meta-commentary on how viewers experience the movie's countless continuity errors and shifting backgrounds. Because Stanley Kubrick packed the film with so many subliminal details, impossible layouts, and shifting set pieces, viewers often feel like they are noticing things no one else has ever seen before. This phenomenon creates an unsettling illusion that the movie is a living, breathing entity changing itself for each individual watcher. While purely a psychological trick of Kubrick's meticulous directing, the rumor highlights the deeply personal and hallucinatory relationship audiences develop with the film's hidden depths. The Minotaur myth entry replaces the traditional ghost story structure with a classical Greek mythological framework, casting the Overlook Hotel as an elaborate labyrinth. Proponents of this theory point out that Stanley Kubrick replaced the hedge animals from Stephen King's novel with a massive hedge maze, while also placing a prominent poster of a skier that closely resembles a charging bull in the game's room. In this interpretation, Jack Torrance functions as the monstrous Minotaur, a half-man, half-beast creature driven by primal rage and trapped within the center of a complex maze. Danny Torrance represents Theseus, the clever hero who must use his wits and a literal trail of footprints in the snow to navigate the labyrinth and escape the monster. The Overlook Hotel itself becomes a physical manifestation of this ancient prison, designed to trap human souls and sacrifice them to the beast within. By filtering the narrative through the lens of classical mythology, Stanley Kubrick elevated a simple weekend horror story into an eternal, archetypal battle of survival. The 42 Holocaust metaphor entry explores a deeply unsettling historical subtext proposed by film scholars like Jeffrey Cox in the documentary Room 237. This theory posits that Stanley Kubrick embedded the number 42 throughout the film as an intentional, structural reference to the year 1942, which marked the historical onset of the Nazi regime's final solution. Visual evidence cited by proponents includes the bold number 42, printed clearly on Danny Torrance's shirt sleeves, the movie Summer of '42 playing on a television set in the background, and the product of the room number digits, where 2 times 3 times 7 equals 42. Abandoning the gold standard functions as an economic allegory that reframes the psychological collapse of the Overlook Hotel alongside the structural transformation of the American financial system. This theory draws a parallel between the timeline of the hotel's historical golden era and the year 1933, when the United States officially began phasing out the gold standard under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The hotel's lavish gold room represents the illusion of old-world American wealth and economic stability, which transforms into an isolated, hollow facade fueled entirely by ghostly debts and phantom transactions. The fake Grady Daughter's entry highlights a glaring narrative and visual contradiction surrounding the identity of the hotel's most famous ghosts. When manager Stuart Ullman initially describes the tragic history of the resort to Jack Torrance, he explicitly notes that the previous caretaker murdered his 2 young daughters, who were aged 8 and 10 at the time of their deaths. However, whenever Danny Torrance encounters the spirits in the corridors, they are visibly depicted as identical twins wearing matching blue dresses. This intentional disparity suggests that the apparitions are not a literal historical recording of the real deceased children, but are instead a deceptive, unified illusion generated by the hotel's collective subconscious to target Danny's specific psychological vulnerabilities. The missing television wire's entry focuses on a surreal, physically impossible background detail that subverts the standard rules of logic and reality within the domestic spaces of the hotel. In a prominent scene where Wendy and Danny Torrance sit closely together on a sofa watching a television broadcast, the camera frames the space to reveal that the power cord of the television set is entirely missing and completely unplugged from the wall. This bizarre visual anomaly has led analysts to argue that the media devices inside the Overlook Hotel do not function as normal consumer electronics. Instead, they operate as psychic projection screens directly controlled by the supernatural forces of the resort, broadcasting external realities and warnings straight into the minds of the isolated family members. The synchronicity play, forward-backward, entry refers to a radical, experimental way of watching the movie that was popularized by film theorists in the late 2000s. This method requires projectionists to overlay 2 copies of the film simultaneously, running one copy forward from the beginning while the other copy runs backward from the very end, blending the semi-transparent images together. This bizarre configuration yields a staggering number of unintentional, perfectly aligned visual synchronicities, such as Jack Torrance's face appearing to morph into the ghosts of the hotel or scenes of domestic peace, perfectly mirroring moments of absolute violence. The disappearing dopey entry examines a highly specific, unsettling continuity edit that occurs inside Danny Torrance's bedroom at the beginning of the movie. On the bedroom door, a large, prominent sticker of Dopey from Disney's Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs is clearly visible during the early domestic scenes. However, when the narrative returns to the apartment later in the film, the sticker has completely vanished from the door, leaving no trace behind. This subtle, deliberate removal is viewed as a brilliant psychological cue by Stanley Kubrick to signal that the safe, fairy tale innocence of childhood has been officially erased from Danny's life. The Kubrick Code, cross-contamination entry, explores a macro theory suggesting that all of Stanley Kubrick's films are secretly interconnected chapters of a singular, sprawling grand narrative. Proponents argue that the director utilized a highly specific, recurring vocabulary of visual motifs, numbers, and set designs, such as the labyrinthine spaces of 2001, A Space Odyssey, or The Masks of Eyes Wide Shut, to bridge his seemingly unrelated stories. Within this framework, the events of the Overlook Hotel are not an isolated ghost story, but rather a localized outbreak of a universal, cosmic disease of human malice that infects the background of every masterpiece Kubrick ever created. The invisible cameraman ghost entry elevates the literal physical presence of the film crew into a horrifying element of the in-universe supernatural lore. This theory suggests that the floating, impossibly smooth Steadicam movements utilized by Stanley Kubrick throughout the production do not represent a neutral, objective cinematic lens. Instead, the camera operates as an active, disembodied voyeuristic entity, an invisible ghost or the living consciousness of the hotel itself, that silently stalks the Torrance family through the corridors, dictating exactly how the audience observes their psychological destruction. The Overlook is a living brain entry, transitions the entire physical infrastructure of the resort into a massive, biological metaphor for human consciousness. Under this surreal interpretive lens, the maze-like hallways, geometric carpets, and isolated rooms are not stone and wood, but rather the inner folds, neural pathways, and deep recesses of a monolithic, psychotic mind. The characters trapped inside the hotel do not encounter external spirits. Rather, they are independent thoughts or white blood cells being systematically consumed, rearranged, and digested by the madness of a living, breathing architectural brain. The ultimate personalized copy, entry, brings the entire Iceberg journey to a terrifying meta-conclusion by merging the viewer's reality with the supernatural trap of the Overlook Hotel. This philosophical theory states that the film is engineered as a cognitive trap that physically mirrors the hypnotic allure of the hotel's historical archives. Just as Jack Torrance becomes completely obsessed with the past and is eventually absorbed into the 1921 ballroom photograph, the viewer becomes hopelessly obsessed with decoding the endless layers of the film, meaning that the ultimate personalized copy is the one that successfully traps your own mind inside its eternal, unsolvable labyrinth. This is the end of the video. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If I got anything wrong, please leave it in the comments below. Thanks for watching.